6 key ways to forecast the 2012 presidential election with one of the world's great experts. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief, and this is Election Matters. Well, here we are in April of 2012, still a number of months to go before the November election, but a lot of people, of course, are hard at work trying to figure out, from what we know now, who's going to win in November. And who better to talk to about this than Dr. Christopher Wlezien, who is professor of political science at Temple University in Philadelphia. He and Robert Erickson, a professor at Columbia, have just written the book, The Timeline of Presidential Elections, which is coming out this summer. You'll want to buy a copy, in which they look at all of the historical data leading up to previous elections and try to come to some kind of understanding of how you can forecast ahead of time who's going to win the election. And Chris is with us on the line. Chris, good to have you with us here on Election Matters.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Let's talk about polls first. How's that? I mean, that's what we do at Gallup more than anything else, of course, is just ask people if the election were held today, who you're going to vote for. Right now in our latest Gallup polling, Obama is up by about 3 points. So if we freeze time and say the election were held today, that would indicate Obama's going to win. But we know from history that polls may or may not be a great indicator of who's going to win, Chris. What do the data show? How much should we rely on these polls at this point?
Well, they give us a good amount of information. I mean, first off, I should mention that your polls are pretty much in line with other polls. So it looks like it's a 3 to 4 point Obama advantage in the polls in a hypothetical matchup with Romney. I guess it's still hypothetical. But these polls this early on, as you suggested, are not the complete story of what's going to happen, and don't tell us the complete story of what's going to happen in November. After all, they tap preferences today, not to vote at some point in the future, and certainly not as far away as November. What we need to do is we need to take the polls and sort of project forward, what we call poll projections. And we do this based on history. We have elections in the past, and we have polls at this point in time, or roughly this point in time in the past, and we see how they relate. And when we do that, interestingly enough, it actually gives Obama maybe a slight boost. And so, what it might be, and if he's leading 3 points in the Gallup poll right now, we might expect, the odds are that he's likely to do a little bit better, maybe 3.5 points on election day.
Based on where the data are now, he, based on history, might actually gain a little. That's what history would show. Certainly, he's not going to. The data wouldn't show he'll lose dramatically.
No, but it's highly uncertain. I mean, this is as you know, these are early days. The polls, the way we like to characterize it, what we found based on our empirical research, is that the polls today tell about half the story of what's going to happen on election day, and the other half is yet to unfold. Will be clear in the next 6 or 7 months.
Okay, Chris, let's go to a second indicator, presidential job approval. This is a nice year for that because we have an incumbent rerunning for election. Obama's job approval in our latest number, 50%. That seems to be kind of a threshold for winning re-election. What about that? What does the 50% job approval rating for Obama tell us right now?
Well, 50% maybe better than it seems. It looks like the kind of the cut point for presidents, for incumbent presidents, is about 48, maybe 48.5, somewhere in there, between 48 and 49%. So, president sitting with 48, 49% approval is probably an odd, it's a coin flip winning at this point in time. And one with 50 is probably a little better than a coin flip, pretty much like what we already see in the polls.
Yeah, at least we know from our Gallup poll history that Obama is not down there where Carter was or where George Bush Sr. was. They were significantly lower, and of course they went on to lose. So Obama's doing better than the last 2 losers in terms of presidents seeking re-election, no question about that.
Yeah, things can happen. Approval, it's a good indicator to watch, and particularly early in the next few months. Later on in the election season, you'll be wanting to watch the polls a little bit more closely than approval.
All right. What about this one? You mentioned this in a recent paper you gave, experts predicting, political scientists. If you try to interview people like yourself, what do they say? Is that valuable, real quickly?
Well, it's not clear how valuable it is. I mean, I'm as a political scientist, I tend to think that we have some indication of, it's our jobs. But we don't have a lot of historical data on this, so we can't, unlike the polls, we can't say, well, in the last 15 elections, the experts said this in April, and the elections turned out like that. But we do know what they say, and they're giving Obama the edge as well. The vote prediction right now, at least for March, of 18 political scientists polled, is 51.6% for Obama. 48.5 or so for Romney.
All right. What about average Americans? Some people I know have argued that if you just ask Americans not who you're going to vote for, but who do you expect is going to win, that could be predictive. What about that?
Well, they too show a slight edge to Obama. The poll actually in January gave Romney the edge, 49% to 46%. But the March...
And this is asking Americans, who do you think is going to win, regardless of who you're going to vote for?
Precisely. Who do you think is going to win? In March, that number switched around and is now, at least in March, with 54% saying Obama would win and 40% saying Romney.
We'll follow that. Now, when we track here at Gallup Economic Confidence, we see Americans are getting more positive about the economy, and I know you and others have spent a lot of time trying to build models based on the economy, right?
Yes.
A lot of people say structurally that's the best indicator. So just putting it all together based on what we know about the economy and leading economic indicators today, what does that predict about who's going to win next November?
Well, those two indicators give us a different picture. You're right. The economic news has been good. Leading economic indicators have been really good, actually. But even by historical standards, have been better than your average election year. What we're seeing there is the economy coming out from the bottom it was in back in 2009 and 10. But we're not seeing huge realizations of this. We've seen a slight drop in the unemployment rates, but we're not seeing big gains in income. And so income over the last 2 years has been really very flat. Over the course of the last 3 years of the Obama administration, there's been virtually no growth in per capita income at all.
So what does that tell us?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, to the extent that voters are reflecting on income, not whether or not they have a job, but how much money they actually have in their pockets and are able to spend. It doesn't seem very good news right now for Obama. It could get better.
So still mixed indicators as far as the economy is concerned.
Yes, from one suggesting probably not good news to another suggesting good news. We're getting mixed, but we're not getting middling.
Very interesting. Finally, Chris, there are such things as prediction markets where people, like the stock market, bet. That is, average people, anybody can go online and bet at these various places about who they think is going to win. I know Obama's ahead in those betting markets now. Is that valuable information for us to know?
Well, it is. These markets show what I think 60% probability, 62% probability of Obama winning. To me, it's basically in line with pretty much everything else except the economic indicators, which are kind of split. But if you average the two split economic indicators and think that that's what voters are going to do on Election Day, well, then all the six methods here produce essentially the same answer. It's a slight edge to Obama, but there's a long way to go.
Well, that's my bottom line. So if you had to say right now, you would say what in terms of predicting who's going to win in November? With all these caveats, Chris, of course. Lots can change. There's campaigns. I think the subtitle of your book is, Do Campaigns Matter? And to some degree, obviously, they do. Obama has to choose a vice president. Romney has to choose a vice president, and lots of other things can change. But if you had to say right now, sum it up for us, who's going to win in November?
Well, if I had to bet, I'd bet on Obama, but I wouldn't have bet a whole lot.
All right. So in other words, things really can change.
Things can change. I mean, the odds of him winning right now are probably, if we ran the election 100 times, he'd probably win it 60 or 62 or 65 times, but he'd lose the other times.
Aha. All right. Very interesting. And we'll come back and check in with you a little later when things get more certain into the summer. We'll all want to buy your book. Again, it's Chris Wlezien and Robert Erickson, the authors of the book, The Timeline of Presidential Elections, University of Chicago Press, coming out this summer. And you really go into great depth on how you can look at these indicators and do a pretty good job of predicting the election, particularly as time moves on. Chris, I want to thank you for being with us on Election Matters today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Frank.
Susan Page will be back with us next week. She's off this week. And this has been Election Matters. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief.